Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. One mic, two idiots, and, according to our latest figures, 3 listeners. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leaks.
Before we start, Andy, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsors, MoneyFarm. Now, MoneyFarm are the largest digital wealth manager in Europe, and they create portfolios of ETFs for their clients. They're incredibly cheap and ideal for somebody who's wanting to get into investing, and perhaps for more experienced investors who don't actually want to run their own money anymore. Now, they will even offer to run the first £20,000 of any of our listeners' portfolio absolutely free if they enter the code MTTM20K into the website at moneyfarm.com. For more information, check out their website. But for now, Andy, let's get back on with the show.
Hello and welcome to episode 136 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, we're back. We missed a week.
We missed a week. It's a rare occurrence in the world of the Money to the Masses podcast. But I have to say, Andy, I know you are too, I'm actually genuinely excited about being back and recording the podcast. So I suppose the mini rest, it wasn't planned. It kind of it happened because, well, we'll come on to it in a minute, but there was so much that went on with Money to the Masses that at the 11th hour last week, this was on Saturday night, I said to Andy, look, Andy, I think we're going to have to just can this week's show. But the upside of all that is that, yeah, I'm absolutely buzzing this week. It's good to feel like I've finally sat still and can do something that I regularly do and love. And although people think recording the podcast and prepping it and all this stuff is hard, actually, after all the years we've been doing it, it's also good fun for us to do it. And me and Andy haven't spoken in 2 weeks.
It's a well-oiled machine. It's something that we do every week and we put in the calendar. And it is just good to catch up. We have a brief sort of window at the start of the pod where we sort of talk about the boring stuff that you guys wouldn't want to listen to at home, things like children and family. And it just genuinely is nice to catch up.
And how Andy won a fan in a radio competition, as well as a whole bunch of other goodies like boxing head guards. Only in the world of Andy Leaks would things like that happen. But anyway.
Yeah, so what have we got in the world of money, in the world of Money to the Masses? What are we giving the listeners this week?
Right, there are 2 pieces that are derived from events that occurred to me or I was part of in the last 2 weeks, actually. And the third one is around the new rules that came in to do with roaming charges on phones. Now, when you go abroad, you used to get absolutely hammered with roaming charges. Now, the rules have changed that isn't the case anymore. But, as with everything that seems to be an EU rule or a change in legislation, it's never quite as simple as it sounds. So I want to cut through the noise and actually explain how it works and what to watch out for.
Okay, so what are we going first? Are we doing the events, or are we doing?
Well, we're going to do the first event, and this one occurred on a couple of days ago, actually. Now, if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, then you'll see that I met Will.i.am, the pop star, the other day. Now, I know you're going to be listening to this podcast and think, what the hell has money got to do with Will.i.am? And it was a brilliant evening. What happened is I got invited by a bank called Atom Bank. And Atom Bank are an app-only bank that have launched in the UK. And they've been around for a while. They do mortgages, but they're trying to get into current accounts. Now, they've actually tied up with Will.i.am in a partnership. And, of course, what happened, they then are talking about it and what's been sort of the reasons and everything. So they asked me if I would go and I would have a one-to-one interview with Will.i.am, which obviously I said yes. And the reason I did it is because, unlike what most journalists would want to go in probably just to meet Will.i.am and ask him about Brexit, before we did the one-on-one bit, there was actually a room of about 10 people when he was there talking. And one of the things there's a Q&A section, and one of them asked him about Brexit. And I don't know why somebody would ask Will.i.am his opinion on Brexit, which just shows you how money journalists think. They do the same thing. I was much more interested in the technology angle of things, because obviously I do the money stuff all the time, because a lot of people would sit there and think that the idea of having Will.i.am and a bank tie-up seems completely ludicrous. And the purpose of this bit I want to quickly talk about is I actually see why they have done it. And I didn't ask them why they did it, because I get it. Because if you think about it, Andy, me and you Okay, I work in the world of money. You kind of do. You're in accountancy. But the idea of having people from different areas of, whether it's music, I deliberately don't have people, for example, I partner with or have working for me, who work in finance, because there are amazing sort of insights you get from other industries. Because this is a tip for anybody out there: if you're trying to solve problems in your industry, whatever it is, if you only speak to people within your industry, they will try and solve the same problems in exactly the same way. And I think it was Einstein who said that was a definition of idiocy or something like that. So this isn't a plug for Atom Bank, but what I wanted to talk about, there was something, when I spoke to Will.i.am, there was some actual insight that came out of it, which is interesting. One of them is to do with the future of technology, which I'll come on to, in my own view of how future technology could impact what we do with money. Because Will.i.am is actually, don't think of him just as the pop star. Will.i.am is a massive entrepreneur, and he runs a show in America called Planet of the Apps, which is all about, think of Dragon's Den, but with people going on with apps. That is kind of what it is, and they have some other famous people on it. So he's a tech entrepreneur, so that's why they've got him. I can see you laughing.
No, I'm laughing because of how slow my brain is. Because you said Planet of the Apps, and I thought that's a really weird name for a show. And then literally I could hear the whirring in my brain, and it went ding about 10 seconds later, and it went, it's a funny play on the words Planet of the Apes. So yeah, I was just laughing at my own sort of slow brain.
I think if people go back and listen to the back portion of the podcast, they probably heard the ding as the penny there's a penny drop there. But the idea of the program is obviously people go and pitch apps, and Metro Bank. So I said Metro Bank, Atom Bank. And now the reason I say I always end up making the slip is you'll be listening to this thinking, I don't know of Atom Bank. Now they have savings accounts that have come out. They haven't got a current account. But the guy who launched it, the main man, the CEO, he actually is the guy who created Metro Bank in the high street. And don't forget, Metro Bank caused a real stir. And so he's a pioneering guy. And he's actually as interesting as Will.i.am in a way, because I find people who are in the world of money who are trying to push boundaries incredibly interesting to talk to. So now, going back to Will.i.am, I just want to tell you a quick story. I don't want to dwell on it too much. It's not a name-dropping episode. But one of the things that Will.i.am talked about when he was saying about his story when he grew up, which struck a chord with me, and it's something that can be applied to people's money. Now, Will.i.am was chatting around about how he grew up and about how the system is rigged. And he's talking about life. So when he grew up and he was talking about the sort of hood and everything, that in America they have something called zoning. And that means in cities you can't, in the posh areas, you can't have, to use his terms, sort of a strip joint or a liquor store next to a school and stuff like that. So they end up having different types of facilities being separated and can't be next to each other, which promotes positive behaviour, basically. So you're not going to be encouraged for people to go and get their money and then go to a strip joint or whatever it may be. But in the poor areas, that zoning breaks down and doesn't exist. And he was saying how he goes and helps the young people and has done programs in terms of helping them get better education, but understanding how the system is rigged for them to fail, which is the key phrase about nearly everything that this next section is going to focus on, is that the system is rigged to fail for people, but in the money world, the system is rigged to make you fail as well. And so what I want to draw the analogy with is what Will.i.am was talking about for people who live in poor areas in inner cities in America, and they're rigged to fail and end up in a prison that's only deliberately just outside where they live. In the finance world, the same thing occurs. Now, by that I mean they try and encourage you to get into debt, or they try and lock you in. A good example is if you're a student and you're listening to this, what will happen is a bank will deliberately try and get you or give you credit, access to credit, even though you can't really afford to pay it back. And the reason they do that is not because they like you. The reason they do it is because they're trying to get you into debt. And if you're indebted to them, it makes it difficult you can't leave them. You won't be able to necessarily move banking elsewhere. And the idea that you will stay with them is something they know will happen, because what they hope is that when you get further down the line and assume you're going to be successful and maybe have more money, you're going to end up, via the powers of inertia, we don't change banks. Most people keep a bank account for, I think it's 14, well, most of their life, at least 14 years. Now, what they hope will happen is that you will get a mortgage, therefore, and a massive, bigger debt, and you will get that mortgage through them, and they'll make loads of money through you and by cross-selling products. So the system is rigged for you to fail, and it's actually deliberately set up. So you are going to become indebted and entrapped by that, and that spiral. So it's taking the idea of what Will.i.am said exists actually in the world of finance, even if he does not maybe realise that, I think, in the UK banking industry anyway. So what I want to get from this is that one of the things I've spoken about probably right in the very first podcasts we did was something that I talked about as big picture budgeting. And now, very simple premise of this, which I'm going to explain, is that you end up trying to zone your money. Now, I'm going to use the word that Will.i.am used when he was talking about his life, and he was saying about zoning. Now, if you apply the idea of zoning to your money to try and de-rig the system, so you try and get things zoned so you can't be manipulated, or you can't be led down to a sort of a negative pathway that the people in power want you to be led down. So, to give you an example, what I end up talking to people is try and tell them, in the world of free banking, what we have now, and this is something that probably is going to come under, we're probably not going to have in future actually, free banking, but at the moment free banking exists. You can have lots of bank accounts. Now what I very quickly try and get people to do is say, look, you get a pay packet come in, it hits your bank account, you have a load of direct debits coming out, you use your card here, there and everywhere, but you just feel like you're never in control and don't know how much money you have at any given time. So when I say to you, Andy, do you want to come down the pub? And you might be sitting there thinking, can I afford to? You don't really understand it, whether you can or can't. And so the decision-making process is blurred, and you just kind of stick your finger in the air and go with it. Now, I'm not just saying you, Andy. That's just the general what people do, and I do it. So what I try and encourage people to do is sit there and live their life how they live it, and enjoy their idiosyncrasies of the way they spend money for a whole month, and use something like an app and technology. I'm a big fan of technology, as people know anyway, with money. And you can use spending tracker apps out there that will actually, one of them is called Spending Tracker, that if every time you spend money, it will turn around and you input what you spend it on, it will analyse that, and it will then show you at the end of the month what you spent your money on and what proportions, etc. So you can find out how much money you spend on coffee. But it doesn't involve you having to sit through and go like bank statements like people used to. So that's a positive. So it's a very quick way of getting information. Now, once you quantify something, you can control it. And if you can control it, the way you do that is you then look at setting up mini budgets. So you set up what you can spend each month on food, what you can spend each month on handbags if you want to, or frivolous spending, or down the pub, what you can spend on bills and your mortgage and all these things. And you set up an account for each of those mini bills. And you then set up standing orders from your main account, so that as soon as your wage hits your main account, it's zoned, it's fired out to these different bank accounts. So you're creating zoning. And what it means is that all your bills will be paid, because your money goes into your mortgage or rent account that you've designated. And once it's done that, that's going to be taken care of. So what you then do is you only ever carry around your frivolous spending card or your food budget card. And then when you want to go down the pub, Andy, all you do is then put in that card or that in the wall, and you see how much balance you've got on your frivolous spending account, and you can sit and go, do you know what, I can't afford it. And the key thing is those accounts that you don't have overdrafts on, so you can't then become indebted, because even if you do some frivolous spending, you'll hit a limit where you're in the shop and it says, no, sorry, you can't have that. Now it also means you can't then eat into your mortgage payment or your bill payments. All these things will give you bad credit ratings by defaulting, are basically zoned and protected. And if you set up direct debits in those accounts to pay those bills, then what you're doing is this idea that Will.i.am was alluding to, where he said that the zoning breaks down when it goes to the people who are vulnerable, who therefore become exploited. That's what happens in the banking world, and you can try and break that cycle by deliberately trying to zone your money. That's what the idea of that kind of budgeting is based upon. So in the world of free banking, you can do that. It's cumbersome to set up, and if you want to know more about it in detail, then go to moneytothemasses.com and then put in big picture budgeting in the search bar, and you'll find a full explanation about how I teach people to do this. But it was just showing you that if you take the idea or the inspirations from people in different industries and you apply it to the world of money, then that's where you can get really great insights and you can solve problems. Because why has nobody ever come up with a product that can do all that on its own? And now that's something that, I'm passionate about. Maybe one day I could get involved in. But that is why I think you shouldn't involve people. Shouldn't just focus solving problems in the same way they've always been solved. And because fundamentally, maybe if Will.i.am and people like that who are very socially grounded and they've got real strong ethics start to be joining this industry and getting involved, because it isn't just from what I understand, a Will.i.am on a poster. He's actually getting involved and going to be on the board of this bank. So if that's the case, he can try and influence the ethics, and we need to start building banks and new things that are ethically sound and don't just use previous practices that rig the system. And before I finish this section, because I'm conscious I've whittled on a little bit on it, is that technology and AI was a thing that Will.i.am is massively involved in, and he's trying to build new projects that help people with artificial intelligence to run their money, to make them help better decisions. Now, I'm a big fan of the idea of technology, and we did a podcast. Do you remember last year I went to a conference in Portugal? And then if you can find, if you go back, and I started talking about different insights from different industries and things that Facebook was saying. And the idea of seeing just 6 months down the line how people are trying to advance that, and people outside the world of finance are trying to advance it and trying to create AI and artificial intelligence that can help you with your money. That is going to be really interesting. Now, just a throwaway comment really, that one of the things that artificial intelligence could do, it could make you smarter with your money, because it will make decisions for you. It will ring you up and maybe say like, hey Andy, you might not want to actually buy that, because if you buy this then you won't be able to go on holiday or whatever it is. Now, artificial intelligence is going to have a massive impact. We won't search anymore, it'll be voice recognition. The only danger is, which is a kind of Damien's thought for the day, and it's a bit like Jerry Springer used to do at the end of his show, it's almost like Damien's thought for the day, is that artificial intelligence is wonderful. The only thing you can have if it's not controlled properly is you can get distortions in markets, because if an artificial intelligence system will optimize decisions, then surely you'll get a mass movement towards a particular solution. And if that occurs, then you get market distortion. So if everybody tries to buy a particular thing, then that could cause a run on that particular product. But it then gets the idea, or opens up the notion of, can an artificial intelligence, if the ethics behind it have to be tightly controlled? Because there's this idea that there is a two-tier internet, that basically the more money you have in terms of companies and people, like there have been accusations about huge corporations, possibly things like Netflix and etc., get more bandwidth on the internet because they are bigger and they almost can pay for it. And there's this idea of an internet neutrality. There's a law they're trying to pass in America, which means that you and I have the same access and bandwidth as a big corporation like that of the internet, because at the moment you don't. Now there is an argument, or my view, that you could get that in the world of finance, that if you get artificial intelligence that's incorporated into our lives and the lives of and the banks and businesses, that they could therefore be given preferential treatment towards better products than people like us. That does exist now in the world of finance, but I'm not sure that artificial intelligence will remove that unless the people who can control it, who build it, deliberately make it so that you and I have the same access. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Will.i.am, artificial intelligence. It's been an exciting week in terms of the future of tech, but the one thing to take away from all this is that innovations are happening in finance, and I think it'll be positive. And the only final, again, I keep saying final thought, is that free banking is probably going to disappear soon because new legislations that are coming out, but that's something for another day.
Good. Yeah, I'm excited by the technology side of things, and it's interesting to see banks tying up with effectively what are pop stars and things like that. I think it's exciting times for the industry. I think things are moving in all sorts of industries as well. I think in insurance we're going to see some real techie advances with, you know, things like cars and GPS and things like this. I think in the future insurances will already be decided based on your driving patterns. I think all cars are going to be tracked, and I think medical insurances and things like that, because of the way that they're tying together all of your medical records now on central computers. I think, you know, filling in forms and things like that is going to be a thing of the past. It's just going to be into the central computer and all tied up, and your insurance premiums will be done almost automatically.
It's all going to be in the matrix. But you're saying that, Andy. That is a real positive, because at the moment, the people out there listening, I'm trying to take out more life insurance, okay? Because one of those things when I had my second daughter, you should always review your situation. So I'm looking to take out more anyway. And I remember doing underwriting. So what happens is you apply for life insurance, and then they look at my medical history and recoil in horror Crohn's disease, and then they want to do various different tests and stuff. And I'm going through that process, but it's so cumbersome, it's so tedious that unless you have people who are a company that's trying to do it, like push this stuff through, I mean, it shouldn't take. I mean, at this point in time, from the very beginning point of trying to get in, I mean, I'm the guy who works in money, right? And I like to think I understand this stuff, and I know what I want, and I know how the system works and why you the underwriting, and I get all that. But even from the point of having the thought, right, I'm going to do this, and I even know who I want to do it with, which is a stage further than most people have, it is still probably taken about over a month. And we're still not even there. We still haven't even got to the point of a decision. And probably of my time to input into this, probably the equivalent of about 3 hours. Now, life insurance shouldn't be the case. And people wonder why the people on the street won't take out life insurance, because the barriers are too high. Technology could help us with that.
And the ironic thing is, the company that you're going with, which we won't mention, it doesn't really matter for what we're talking about here, but the company you're going with is actually the market leader in terms of innovation. The products that they're coming up with and the type of technology that they're using is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best in the industry. And we still get issues like this where we're having to wait, where people are having to wait, months for a decision. It just shouldn't be that way. Like
and like Andy said, the company even uses wearable technology to do some of this stuff that Andy talks about, about tracking things and that. And one of the big issues again that with technology is with money is that like a lot of things in life, you're only as fast as the slowest link in a chain. So therefore, even if people innovate, if the core stuff in the background that runs it isn't innovative or been innovated, then that slows things down. Regulation is one issue as well. It doesn't always move as fast enough to keep up with the innovations. But if what makes it work, it's a bit like if you've got a car and you made it look like a Ferrari on the outside, yet it's still a Renault Clio on the inside, like my old banger that I sold last year. It doesn't matter what you do. People look at it, and when they get in it and drive it, they realise that it's not going to go anywhere. And that is kind of what technology does to a certain extent. If what runs the industry and behind it is still slow, then it doesn't matter how you do the first stuff, but it will eventually catch up. Right, the next part is actually I'm going to do the EU roaming stuff, because the third part, which I'll do very quickly, I went and gave a talk in Brighton to an employer. I get invited by Penguin Publishing to go and do talks to people about money, and so I sit there and I'm going to film one day. Good fun. It's like me sat on a stool and I do a Q&A and stuff like that, and people can ask me anything. And I want to pull out the third part of this podcast, some of the key things that people ask me, because it's going to be the things that you guys want to know. Interest rates is one of them, when they're going to go up, so listen for that. Now, this part is going to be on the podcast. I'm going to feature EU roaming rules. Now, Andy, you go on holiday and you sit there and you look at your phone and you're almost daren't touch the thing, because you think when you're going to go back home, there's going to be a massive bill, and we've all done it. I've done it. And when I was young, carefree, go abroad, you'd ring up people and post pictures. I'm on holiday, and you go back and you pretty much racked up a bill that's equivalent to the holiday.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get exactly that. I'm almost fearful there's a little button that you can turn the data roaming off, and I tend to do that. And then every so often, if I desperately need to get a map up, or if I need to find out information on a restaurant or something, I quickly turn it on, search for it, turn it back off again, like it's some sort of nuclear bomb or something that's going to go off.
And that feeling is what everybody's had. So they go data roaming, and they don't want to be charged. It's never quite transparent how much you'd be charged. And there's been movements slowly, and there have been companies that have launched products that don't charge you for data roaming, which I've used because it's useful for my work. But there was a new ruling that came in that is now live. So if you listen to this podcast, it's fact that the EU have come along and they've said, do you know what? We don't like this idea that you can't move around freely within the EU, and roam like you're at home was actually the phrase that the legislation was using, that you could use your phone like you can where you live. So you could be in the UK and go abroad and effectively use it and not be hammered with roaming charges. So this is something that the European Union provided it was a benefit of the Union. So Brexit is going to throw a lot of this into question when we eventually leave. Because it's going to have to be part of, are we going to be in the European Union anymore for things like this? So Now, the rules are that you're meant to be able to roam like you're at home. Now, what that actually means is that you can call most landlines and mobiles within the EU for the same price as if you were in the UK and calling a UK number. So, I want to use some examples because it's very confusing if you don't otherwise, because there was some, like, it just seems to be nuances. Now, let's just say I went on holiday to Spain, okay? And I'm in Spain. I want to call you at home, Andy, and to tell you all about my holiday and boast about it. Now, that shouldn't cost me anything. It should come out of my minutes. I'm assuming you're on a pay monthly contract here. So if I call Andy and it's in my minutes, if I go to Spain and ring up and boast to Andy about me being on holiday, it shouldn't cost me any more. It should come out of my minutes. And that includes text messages
Other than your
as well.
dignity, of course.
Yeah, my dignity's gone. My dignity's gone. I took a picture, a selfie of Will.i.am. So I've lost it. I posted it on Facebook, so it's gone. So let's pretend I ring up Andy to say I met Will.i.am in Spain. Now, that's interesting. But what about if I was then saying to Andy, I'm going to go and book a restaurant for tonight, and I'm standing outside the restaurant in Spain. I'm looking at it. If I ring that restaurant, then the rules include that I don't get charged for that. That should come from my minutes. If I was to call a local number at home, it's being my minutes, I shouldn't get charged for that either, which is a massive positive. Now, there are some quirks to this. Now, let's say Andy was going to do me a favour and he's in the UK, and he rang that restaurant ahead of time and said, I'm going to book the restaurant. And let's say Andy was going to come out to meet me the next day and we were going to go for dinner. If Andy decided to book the restaurant from the UK, so he called that restaurant in Spain, now he would be charged as if he was roaming. He'd get charged the international calls, despite the European Union and the 28 countries that are within it. If you are in your home country and you ring someone in Spain, or you ring them in the other countries, it will still be charged as a roaming international call. So therefore, you are better off being in Spain. It's better off me booking that restaurant in Spain and using it, because I won't be charged for the call, if that makes sense. And so you do get some kind of quirks like that it isn't just, do you know what, I can call anyone in Europe for free. And one of the things that leads on from that is that to stop people manipulating the rules, because if that did occur, what could happen is you could go to some country in Europe where they do cheap mobile phone contracts, take one out and then go, right, I'm going to go and use it in the rest of Europe, and this is going to be really cheap. So what the rules stop you doing that, because they actually work out that if you spend half of your time over a 4-month period in another country other than the one where you bought the phone contract, your home country, then you start getting charged roaming charges. So does that make sense? But the other quirk is that, let's imagine that I had another friend who, while I was in Spain, okay, let's say I had a friend who'd gone to Italy and I rang that person in Italy. Now that phone call would be free as well, because I'm calling within the European Union. I'm in the European Union, I'm calling another phone in the European Union. So that is a quirk. But if I was in the UK and I rang the person in Italy, then I would be charged as a roaming one, as I said. So there are some slightly odd rules, which is why I wanted to give examples like that, because they're a little bit clouded and people are not sure when they get charged or when they don't. So the kind of rule of thumb is, if you're in the UK and this is talking about pay monthly contracts, you're going to get charged for ringing abroad. But once you're abroad, you can then use your phone pretty much as you please and ring other numbers within the European Union. Now, the one caveat again to that is if you are using data. Now, they will apply fair usage tariffs on data. So data is one of the ones where you have to be careful. You can't just go and hammer it abroad. So you'll get information from your provider when you go over there. Now, there's nothing you need to do to benefit from these rules. It's automatic. As of now, you're all beneficiaries of these new rules. They've changed. And I just want to finish on one other final quirk of this system, because to determine where you are, it will be picked up by where the telephone mast is. Now, there technically are cases where you could be near a border and it can think that you're in a different country to where you actually are. So let's say your hotel's right on the border, but it picks up a mobile phone mast in a country next door, which does happen. Now, if that country happens to not be in the European Union or under these rules, then you are going to fall foul. You're going to be roaming charges. So you could be sitting there smug on your hotel, but it's picked up a mast that's the other side of the border where you are, and be telling your friends that where you are and all this sort of stuff, and you get home and you could get a shock bill. So the only way you're going to know that is if you keep an eye on the provider your phone is attaching to, and make sure it's a provider that's within the country that you're in. So these are great movements in the rules surrounding roaming charges, and it's a big positive. But there are, as inevitably, some minor quirks. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers in the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Good stuff. So you mentioned earlier there were 2 events that you've been to in the last couple of weeks. We've done Will.i.am. What was the other one? Was there any famous people at this event?
The other no, there was no one famous at it. It was I went to Brighton though, and
other than you,
other than me, Andy, I'd like to think I was remotely famous, but I went to Brighton, and I've never been to Brighton, and I feel quite ashamed to say that. For it seems to be everybody who lives sort of south of Watford has been to Brighton at some point, and I'd never been. So I got invited to go down there and give a talk. Think of it like a surgery. I was in a room with a whole load of people who could sit there and ask me anything on money, which is actually quite exciting. I know it might sound a bit daunting because they could ask you anything, but what it does do is it gives you wonderful insights into what people really are worried about. Now, if you think about this podcast, Andy, you've got me and you've been sort of, you ask the questions that people always want to know, and we had that kind of dynamic stuff, and I come up with topics. But to have spontaneity where people say, do you know what, Damien, what's going on with interest rates? And that is useful because what I want to do is take 1 or 2 of those questions that I was asked and throw them out there on the podcast, just because they are topical and people want to know. And I mean, you may have heard my opinion on some of these things in the past. So I'm going to just go through the first one is interest rates, okay? I'm always asked what's going to happen with interest rates. I know I'm conscious this will date this portion of the podcast. I know we make them evergreen, but my answer to when our interest rates going to go up is that you need to watch what the Bank of England every first Thursday of every month they vote. So there's 8 people at the moment on the committee, and they vote, and it's a majority goes vote. So what they do is they say, shall we keep them the same, lower them, or raise them, and then the majority win. Now what happened recently was, because there's only 8 people on the panel, it's no longer an odd number, there was a split of 5-3 that was actually a shock. People expecting 8-0 that, we'll leave rates the same. But 5 people voted to keep them the same and 3 voted to raise them. And that caused a bit of a wobble in markets because it meant suddenly our interest rates going up. Now, I'm not sure they're about to go up, because the things I would caveat is if it's ever tied, then Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, gets a deciding vote. And he came out the day after that and said, do you know what, there's no rush to raise interest rates. Now, you can't always trust Mark Carney, because he does often say one thing and then contradict himself the week later. So the point to take away from this, that there is an outside chance that rates could go up at some point in the future, but it's likely if they do to only probably be back to where they were 9 months ago at like 0.5%. But long term, the market is discounting the idea they're going to ratchet up very quickly. So they're still thinking 2 years, back end of 2018, maybe early 2019, when they might start going up. But this is always up for change. So the real takeaway is if you're thinking of potentially fixing your mortgage and you can do so without excessive charges or exit penalties, then it is worth having a review and speaking to a mortgage broker to see whether it's worth doing, because it is now the rates are historically low on remortgage deals. Now, the other thing somebody asked me was about spending and controlling it. Now, I've already given some view on how you do that on the first part when I was talking about Will.i.am. But one thing I want people to try and do is think differently about when they spend money. And in the world of one-click shopping, I mean, I love one-click shopping. I'm not a massive shopper, but I do it. Do you do it, Andy, on Amazon? That one-click button where you press that's it. It's coming. What you've just looked at, it's coming the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea of one-click shopping destroys this notion of cut up your credit cards. I heard somebody say that you should put your credit cards in an ice cube tray and freeze it and put it in the fridge to control your spending. I mean, someone genuinely said that as a money tip, which seems extreme.
I suppose that goes back to the idea of where you've spoken before about, give it 24 hours sleep on it, and if it's still if you still like it or think it's a good idea the next day, then go ahead and do it. It's kind of like the similar process, but that's mental to put it in the freezer.
Yeah, especially if someone then puts that in their drink, and it's a big ice cube, and at the end they get a credit card. But I mean, like all these things, even my idea about the big picture budgeting or zoning, there is still an element of control, because it means you still shouldn't use credit cards, and you could still, do you know what I mean? And even if you still need an element of control of not signing up to these one-click ideas or saving your credit card into your browser. And the problem with technology, the advances, are they get to the point where you're going to end up being able to just buy stuff on your iPad with your fingerprint. Do you know what I mean? There's elements of that already in existence, and so therefore just being next to your iPad is going to be enough for it to say, yep, that's cool, Damien says I can buy that. That is where technology makes things too easy for some people, and we're going to have an element of control. Now, one of the things to do that is I think you need to start thinking about why you buy things, and it's if you try and very simply differentiate everything you do and everything you buy, is it a want or is it a need? And if you need it, that can go sailing through. If it's a want, if it's something that you slightly more frivolous, then by labelling something, you're defining it as something that is not a necessity and makes you think twice. And that anything that can slow down the purchase of something is a positive. So you go down the shop and you say to me, Damien, do you want to come out? Is it a want or is it a need? Now, it's not a need, it's a want. And if I start to be able to realise that, do you know what it is? If you can shine a light on something, you can start to quantify things, you can control it. And it's only by doing that, if you start to pigeonhole things, you start to be able to begin to control it, or be able to even want to control it, if that makes sense. So it's not necessarily being really draconian about stuff, but it's being honest and starting to stop burying your head in the sand. You're saying, yeah, okay, cool, I'm being frivolous, I'm doing that. But you're understanding it.
Damien, you're speaking my language, because my wife has been badgering me for the last month to have a 40th birthday party this year. So what I need you to do is I need you to speak to my wife, and I need you to tell her, now, Emma, is this a want or is it a need? Because I've got a feeling this is a want, and we can shelve this party and save ourselves about £500.
And when I speak to your wife, Andy, I'm going to say, do you know what? I think Andy really needs a party, because I really need a night out. See, wants and needs are subjective, but hey, Andy, yeah. So we all need a good night out is the point of that. So yeah, it's one of those things that if you can start to change the way you think, I think when the world is rigged to make it easier for you to spend, then you need to try and unrig it, and you need to start to change the way it is. And I mean, maybe one day there'll be people, and it's a quite nice circular thing to come back to the very beginning of the podcast, where we are all trying to stop the game being rigged against us, and trying to see how we can improve things. And that is perhaps one way. It's starting to change our relationship with money and how we associate it with, but also understanding all those idiosyncrasies that we all have. And I mean, by that, when people might not understand what I mean by that, but what I mean is that there are some things that people just won't buy, or there are just some things people will buy, or there are things they do like, and there are products they might not. Some people, I know someone who is absolutely anti a particular bank, because when he was struggling, when he was in employment wanted to just extend his money for his overdraft just temporarily, they said no, despite having his full history. Now, that's a personal choice for him, but that's an idiosyncrasy of him. No matter what happens, he would not go with that bank, even though they were the best products. And I'm not sure on artificial intelligence will ever understand that. So yeah, there are those things. The other thing I always say to people, three big things to do, and we've mentioned it on the podcast before, is to make sure you check your wills. Again, Will.i.am. There's so many circular references in this podcast. People would think I prepped it. The life insurance, a bit like I'm doing life insurance, always make sure you've got enough to at least cover your mortgage and keep a roof over your family's head, but do make sure you have life insurance, because if the worst happens, then you're going to avoid a financial disaster, at least for your family. And make sure you clear debts with savings. It's a big one, but it seems ridiculous. But if you're saving and you're getting 2/5 of nothing, so we're talking about savings accounts earlier, but you're paying 18% on a credit card debt, you're effectively paying to save. So clear them. Use your savings to pay off your credit card debt, or at least a portion of it, because if you do need to make a sudden purchase, you'll probably be able to get access to that credit again anyway. So, I mean, that's it for this week. I know I've gone on a little bit. It's been a slightly longer one, but I feel it's a little bit of a bumper one, because we missed 2 weeks, or we missed a week rather.
No, I think the listeners deserve that, absolutely. A couple of questions. Will.i.am, you mentioned earlier about one of the journalists sort of going back to the whole, reeling off the same old questions. What was his views on Brexit, by the way? Did he have any?
He did, and I'm gonna be slightly honest. I did glaze over at the question, so I was only half listening to the response on that. But his view was more about technology and the fact that it's really a unifier, and the idea that technology, it can slow things like Brexit, can actually hamper maybe some things. But let's be honest, technology doesn't do Brexit. It's technology and innovation is something that can exist whether Brexit is here or not. It may be the rules and regulations might be have an impact, but do you know what? People, when they innovate and make changes, it's going to happen no matter what. And the internet is actually one of those things that technically, although it can feel divisive sometimes, but it does unite everybody. It's a way of being able to communicate with people. People can listen to this podcast, and they do, on the other side of the world. There are people listening to this who are living in Spain or expats, and that's the thing that technology can do, and they're going to be able to do that whether Brexit happens or not. So theoretically, his view was, I think he was probably slightly confused with the question, but that's just the way people they're obsessed about certain things. They'll ask questions about them. But the other thing is, one thing people have asked is he a nice guy? And he generally is, actually. He's a really nice bloke, and he is, you can tell you meet him and talk to him, he's incredibly bright. So I love the idea that people are more than just what the boxes they're put in, whether it's you're pigeonholed in life into being a money guy, a pop star, or you're going to be somebody who's going to end up with financially illiterate, or whatever it is. The idea of boxing, I like the idea of zoning your money, but I don't like the idea of pigeonholing people, and it's all about trying to break out of those. And it's nice that there are people trying to make a difference across industries. But anyway, there you go, Andy. So that's it for this week. Don't forget, everybody, please leave a review for this podcast. If you're interested in the background, I am doing things for the One Giant Leap podcast. The second season is going to be recorded soon. So if you do know of anybody who would like to be on it, or you'd like to be on it, then please let us know. Usual address is Andy, Damien at moneytothemasses.com, or via Twitter, money2themasses with the number 2. And actually, I do encourage people to ask me questions via Twitter. It's the one way I almost instantly respond all the time, because it's very succinct and quick.
Damien, you've done it. You've covered everything in the last few sentences there. Brilliant. You're saving me some time. I enjoyed it this week. It was good fun.
I enjoyed it. I missed it. We will be back next week. There won't be a missed episode, I promise.
Good stuff. Until next week.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.